Good morning, friends. I am so excited about today because we are coming to a pinnacle of the teachings of Jesus Christ. Now, he's the most influential person in history, and I can talk more about that at some point, maybe this week as I describe these days. In this video series, this playlist series, I'm giving you the information of what took place on each day of the week of the Passion of Jesus Christ. So please, if you're not already, subscribe to this channel, Lessons to Learn Ministries. I love teaching. It's something God has helped me to develop as he has taught me, and I've wanted to learn, and I want to share these things with you. So like this, subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell so you'll be reminded that this is another one that comes up when I post another one, and I still plan to do this each day up through Easter, and then following that as God leads. So what I want to do today, now remember what happened. Remember the last video where I talked about Monday, where Jesus cleansed the temple. Well, Jesus is just about to give a lot of information and show his passion as he teaches and interacts with the people in Jerusalem for this Passover celebration. So hold on to your hats because there's a lot here. And I have just gone through this again just now and come up with some good things to share with you. There's way too much that I could get into. I'll probably try to do other things in the future because so much is packed into this day. So go to the map here again with me and think about what's happening. Now, Jesus again in the morning, he's staying in Bethany, that's southeast of Jerusalem. Okay, he's staying in Bethany. And he goes back into Jerusalem, and on his way, they pass that fig tree that he had mentioned on his way back before, as we take the gospel accounts and correlate them, harmonize what's going on. We see that there was a comment made on the way there, and then a comment made on the way back. So we're going to pick it up here, and if you've got your Bible, I want you to turn to Matthew chapter 21. Because it was in the morning again, this was Tuesday morning, Tuesday of the Passion Week of Christ. Tuesday morning, again in the morning, he returned to the city and they passed this fig tree again. And the fig tree had already withered. Now this was interesting, and it's kind of symbolic of what was happening to the religious leaders because of what they were doing, and we'll develop this as we go forward. So we have this fig tree that withered, and so suddenly, after Jesus had just said something to the fig tree about being cursed right the day before, the evening before, and the disciples marveled at that, and he would use it later in teaching them. All right, so what we see in what's going on in this text is that you have basically, I want to outline it in three main things. Okay, you have Jesus on Tuesday going into the temple. So you have the temple debates and different people he's debating with, and we'll develop that here in just a moment. Then you have, secondly, him describing his teaching. So the teaching is described, and I'll go into that a little bit. And then third, you have the tribulation discourse where he went back, left the temple, sat across from it at the Mount of Olives adjacent to the temple, and that's when he talked to his disciples. So hang on to your hats. We're getting into this now. All right, so Matthew 21, as we go forward, you first see the interesting thing of the temple debates, and you see the question about Jesus's authority. All right, so he came into the temple, it says in Matthew 21:23, and the chief priests and the elders confronted him. Okay, so they're trying to trip up Jesus. Remember, they're jealous of him. They hate the influence he has. They hate the influence with the people that he has, and so they're jealous of him. So they're trying to trip him up. So you see, they question him on his authority. So Jesus in his wisdom says, well, I'll ask you a question and I'll answer you if you answer me. Now, not that he was trying to deny he's God and he has the authority here, He proves that as he goes on. But he knew they were just trying to trip him up. So the tricky question that he asked him, you tell me where John the Baptist baptism came from, and then I'll tell you, was it from heaven or from men? And if you answer that, I'll tell you where my authority comes from. Now, he had already said this if they'd paid attention, and he goes and says it more. But they didn't want to answer that question because they were afraid of what people might say. They were afraid of the multitude, it says here. They feared people. Oh, friend, do not fear people. Do not fear circumstances. Do not fear a coronavirus. The creator of your life and of mine, he's in control. And you need to have faith in him, and we'll see that. We'll see the importance of what Jesus said about that as we go through. But these leaders, they're trying to trip him up. And so he didn't answer their question of authority, but he answers it when he goes through and starts doing this debate as they come to him with questions. Do you like confrontation? Well, they were trying to trip Jesus up. They were hitting him left and right with all these questions. Now, I don't necessarily like confrontation, but I have been hit with a lot of questions. I worked in a campus ministry. You can read more about some of that background in the book that I wrote. And I have had questions from all kinds of different people, professors, asking about the validity of the Bible, the person of Jesus, and other things. And I've had to study, and I've had to learn, and I've had to grow in my understanding. And I can tell you, you can trust this book. You can trust what it says. It is true in its history. It is true in whatever it speaks to. And you need to know more about it. You don't need to be biblically illiterate. You need to have a spiritual passion, as I've talked about, because our Savior, Jesus, had this passion. So are you being passionate for spiritual things? You need to know the Word. So know what he's doing and what he's teaching. The chief priests and elders, they're questioning him on his issue of authority. And he deals with that. And then he goes and tells parables. Now, a parable is an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. So Jesus tells these stories, and he's giving a greater spiritual truth when he tells the parable. So you have to kind of know what he's talking about. And in that way, he can teach and say things where some people don't get it if they're blind to what he's trying to say. And so they won't cause more problems. And yet the people who do will understand and benefit. So he tells the parables. He starts off telling the parable of the two sons. And what we get out of this, and I only have time to hit this, the highlights and the summaries here, but you need to read this text. My goodness, if you read in Matthew alone, you can go from Matthew 21 right here all the way up into the first couple verses of chapter 26. And this is all what's happening on Tuesday. All of this material. So this is an incredible amount of material, incredible amount of things you can learn from this. But I'm going to hit the highlights. So you have the parable of the two sons. And what you can really get out of that is actions are more important than words. I'm giving you principles here. It's better to do and not want to have done than to want to do and not do. So, are your actions what they should be? Are they say what you say you're going to do? Are you being a person of your word? That's what he taught here when he told the parable of the two sons. Then he goes into the landowner or the vineyard and how the son would be treated in that. And Jesus basically was talking about his rejection, but that's where we have him saying and quoting the Old Testament prophecy that the one who the builders rejected is become the chief cornerstone. So we have that coming from this teaching on Tuesday. And then you have the idea there also that you reap what you sow. And so he said the people who actually are bearing fruit are the ones that are going to receive the reward. And God is not mocked. Galatians 6:7-9, you should know that. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. It's not karma. It's God. Whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. If you sow to the flesh, the physical, the flesh, you'll reap corruption. Because our flesh, our old nature is corrupted. But if you sow to the Spirit, you'll reap life everlasting. And do not grow weary in well-doing, for you will reap in due season if you do not faint or lose heart. So, God makes sure let us know and teach us over and over that you reap what you sow. And Jesus is doing it here again. The third parable is of the marriage feast. And all those who were invited to come, they have to take part in the marriage or they'll be cast out. But the people who originally were invited they didn't do what they should do. And so he went out into the highways and byways and compelled them to come in. And there's a lot you could say more about this marriage feast. Basically, he's saying that these religious leaders there are going to be cast out. And that there's going to be other people who come in to the marriage, and that's the church that Jesus said he would establish, and that's to us today in the age we live in. So we go secondly to the attack of confrontation. We had the chief priests and elders, and now we have the Pharisees and the Herodians attacking him, and they attack him on taxes. And this is where you get that great statement that is commonly known by a lot of people when it comes to the clash that can be between the church and the state. Jesus said, render to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. Now, how wise was that? And the Creator gave us that wisdom, and that statement is here on this Tuesday as he's teaching in the temple. And then you have the attack of the Sadducees. Now, you have the Pharisees in it. You have the Sadducees. You want to know the difference between Pharisees and Sadducees? Well, I just like to think of it as the Sadducees. They had different theology. The Sadducees, they didn't believe in miracles or the resurrection, so they were sad, you see, because they didn't have anything to look forward to beyond their own life. All right. The Pharisees weren't always fair, you see, because they were too legalistic. But you could get into that more in understanding it. But you've got the Sadducees asking him, and they go and they throw this bogus question. They don't even believe. They ask this question of Jesus when they approach him. The Sadducees do here in Matthew 22, and they say in the resurrection, this person had all these different wives. In the resurrection, whose wife is going to be the wife of this man? Okay, they didn't even believe in the resurrection. All right, so they're just trying to trip him up. That's all they're doing. And this is where you get a great statement of Jesus where he said, God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. So friend, if you want to really have an abundant life, you better know Jesus. You better know the spiritual power you can have, the passion that Jesus had, the passion that you can have, that I have, because I know him and try to abide in him. So you can know that. And he said, you make sure that you know that God is the God of the living, and he's about to be killed and resurrected. And that's what we're looking forward to. So then, fourthly, you have the attack of the scribe who comes in, the one who did the law, and he was a lawyer. He was probably a Pharisee too. And he's the one who asked, and this is where you get this great question. Hey, teacher, what's the greatest commandment? You know, they knew the 10 commandments, and we need to know that. And I'm going to talk about this in another set of playlist teaching here, but and how you can understand it. But he said, those 10 commandments, what's the greatest in the law? And Jesus made this great statement that you should know here. He basically, he hit it here really good in chapter 22, as you see here. Jesus said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And we see also in Mark 12, in the parallel passage, your strength. So love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. Do you meet up with that? Are you doing that? We need to seek to. Are you passionate? Are you passionate about that? Friend, be passionate about that. Don't be fearful of this virus or anything else, of any other sin. Be passionate about this. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And love your neighbor as yourself. Love God, love others. That's the summary of the 10 commandments. Love. Love God first, and then if you love him right, you'll love other people. All right, so we're going to the second category, the second part of this Tuesday, and I'm going to try to hurry to get through this a little faster so this video won't be too long. I'll be glad to answer more questions if you want to leave them. I'll be glad to talk about some of these things more, and I think I might, to get into it a little more deeply. But second, you have the teaching described. And that's where Jesus is going on, and he is talking with them. And he asked them a question now. And he said, who is the Messiah? Whose son is he? And so they said, well, the son of David, they answered. And then he said, well, how did David call him Lord? And he quoted the Psalms and said, if David calls him Lord, then if David called him Lord, how is he David's son? So basically, Jesus is in an indirect way talking about him being the Messiah. He is the one they were looking for. He is the Son of God. He is, as the Son of God, he's God. And that's where he quotes from David, the Lord said unto my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies my footstool. And so you've got so many things going on here. And that's one of the great things that Jesus questioned them on. And so after that, they stopped asking him questions. They ran out of questions because Jesus knew the answers, and he is the Son of God, and he's about to make the sacrifice necessary so we could be right with God. So you have the teaching described, and then you have in that basically he is saying first that he is the Christ, he's the Messiah, and then secondly Jesus is talking. He's the commentator. He's going and talking about the leaders who are in authority. And as he does that, he says to them, to the leaders in authority, that you should respect them and do as they say, but don't do as they do. And he's getting ready to talk about some of what they do. And he said, if you want to be great, you have to be a servant. All right, so what I get from that is basically humility. What he said, humility is the only way to exaltation because God humbles us. And friend, that's what he's doing. He's humbling his people in this time in the church, and he's humbling the world with what's going on with this coronavirus. So God humbles his people. And thirdly, under this teaching described, you have Jesus the condemner. And this is where, you think Jesus is just a God of love? He is. But Jesus is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And he hits them hard with the truth because they need to hear it because they're stuck in their pride. And what he says to them, he basically goes in and he goes unto woes. He goes into all these woes that are here. He says, woe unto you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites. Over and over, there's 8 of them. That needs to be a list. You need to understand these woes and what he's saying and the way that we could become if we get stuck in our pride. All right, so 8 woes, and basically he said, you're all hypocrites. Scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites, blind. He calls all kinds of names. Now, he's doing this justly because it's true what's going on. So, all right, now you could contrast that with what he said early on in his teaching with the 8 Beatitudes, the attitudes we are to have and the way we are supposed to be. If you go back earlier on to the Sermon on the Mount, great stuff there too. All right, so you see, fourthly, Jesus the Christ, Jesus the commentator, Jesus the condemner, and then Jesus the compassionate. And that's where he looks in Matthew 23 at the end of the chapter. He looks over and he says, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often I would have gathered you together as a hen gathers her chicks, but you would not. You were not willing to do it. What would happen in this world if the church would be more in with Christ, if they would be abiding in him? What would happen? This coronavirus would die. What would God do? What would God do if we had faith? And that's what he basically is saying here. We need to have faith. He, in his compassion, said that he would do more for his children. He said that of Israel. Look in the Psalms, how often he would have done more. He would have fed them with the finest of wheat. And what would God do for you if you would have faith and trust him instead of fear and live that way? Lots could be said there. But Jesus left the temple then. And the disciples were like, oh, look at this great temple. It's so beautiful. Look at these stones and how wonderful they are. And Jesus said, there's not one stone here that's going to be left on another. And how could that be imagined? This was magnificent. This was Herod's temple. You could, look it up. You'd see what it was like. It was incredible. But it was going to be destroyed. So they're walking out. They're walking out of the temple. They're walking across. They're going to the Mount of Olives. And the text tells us basically in Mark 13:3, you can look and see. The text says that it was primarily Peter, James, John, and Andrew. Now, Andrew and Peter were brothers, and James and John were brothers. So you got a couple sets of brothers here that are going with Jesus, and they're talking to him privately. There might have been other people there. There might have been other people sitting down listening because people were astonished at Jesus' teaching. But these disciples are there kind of in a closer group asking him questions, and Jesus is teaching them. Perhaps it was just them. Perhaps it was more. But he goes in, and they were just, what is going on? How is this temple going to be destroyed? And he goes in and then he starts answering the questions. And they basically ask, when is this going to be? What's going to be the sign of your coming? And what's going to be the end of the age, the sign for the end of the age? Now, there's a lot of prophetic teaching there, and there's a lot of confusion on prophecy. And I am going to teach on that as God leads me to, because there's a lot of things you need to know about prophecy and what is being fulfilled or not, and lots of questions and answers there. And we could get into that. Ask me questions if you want at the end of this, but I'm going to come to an end here. Matthew 24 and 25, you have the Olivet Discourse, and you have the Tribulation Discourse, because basically he's talking about the worst time that's ever going to be on the world. You think this is bad? You haven't seen anything yet. You ain't seen nothing yet, as they say, because Jesus said it's going to be, the last half of it especially, it's going to be the worst time ever. And if those days wouldn't be shortened, nobody would be alive. So learn from Jesus. Learn from his teaching. This is Teaching Tuesday. Take some time to get away from the media, to get away from the movies, to get into the Word, to be moved in your spirit by the Word of God. Take some time to do that today. I care about the truth. I care about you learning what God has taught me. And I want to see God work more in this, in the church and in this world and in your life. So remember Teaching Tuesday. And if you want to see what I'm saying the rest of this week, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you hit that notification bell. And I'll see you tomorrow.